Sarah Martinez stepped off the transport shuttle with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and scars she couldn't see written across her soul. The afternoon sun felt wrong on her skin, too bright and too peaceful after 3 years of fighting on Kepler 442b. She was 19 now, though she felt decades older. The war against the Vreks had ended 6 months ago with humanity's victory, and now she was supposed to just go back to normal life. Go back to school, finish her education like nothing had happened. The university campus sprawled before her like an alien landscape. Students laughed and chatted as they walked between buildings, their biggest concerns seemingly about exams and social plans. None of them had seen what she'd seen. None of them had held a dying friend in their arms while plasma fire lit up the sky. None of them had made the choice to call in an airstrike on their own position because it was the only way to stop the Vreks' advance. Sarah's therapist had told her this would be good for her. Returning to civilian life, pursuing her interrupted education, finding purpose beyond combat. The government's veteran reintegration program had fast-tracked her acceptance into New Seattle University's engineering program. They'd even given her a scholarship, though she suspected it was more about good publicity than genuine support. Look at our brave soldiers, seamlessly transitioning back to society. Everything is fine. Nothing was fine. She found her dormitory after asking for directions twice. Her hands didn't shake when she scanned her ID card, which she counted as a small victory. The military had trained that response out of her. Stay calm, stay focused. Assess threats. Neutralize them. Her roommate was already there, a cheerful girl named Emma who immediately launched into an enthusiastic introduction. She talked about her major in environmental science, her boyfriend back home, and her excitement about joining the campus sustainability club. Sarah nodded at appropriate intervals and offered minimal responses. Emma didn't seem to notice the distance, or maybe she was just too polite to mention it. That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The room felt too quiet. She missed the constant hum of the barracks, the sound of other soldiers breathing nearby. Here there was just Emma's soft snoring and the distant noise of students enjoying their Sunday evening. Sarah's mind replayed the Battle of Meridian Valley, the screaming, the blood, the moment her squad leader had looked at her with dying eyes and made her promise to survive. She'd kept that promise. Now she had to figure out what surviving actually meant. The first day of classes arrived with a spectacular autumn sunrise that Sarah barely noticed. She'd been awake since 4 in the morning, her body still locked into military time. She'd done 100 push-ups and run 5 miles on the campus track before most students had even opened their eyes. Physical exercise was the only thing that quieted the noise in her head. Her first class was Introduction to Quantum Mechanics, a lecture hall packed with eager freshmen and returning students. Sarah chose a seat at the back, near the exit. Always know your exits. Always have an escape route. The professor, a middle-aged man with wild gray hair, launched into an energetic discussion about wave-particle duality. Sarah tried to focus, but her attention kept drifting to the windows, checking sightlines, identifying potential threats. Halfway through the lecture, someone's phone buzzed loudly. Sarah's hand flew to her hip, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Her heart hammered in her chest as adrenaline flooded her system. Several students glanced back at her, confused by her sudden movement. She forced herself to relax, to breathe, to remember where she was. Not a battlefield. Not under attack. Just a phone notification. The professor continued speaking, oblivious to her moment of panic. Sarah pressed her palms against her thighs and focused on the pressure, using it to ground herself in the present moment. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. Her next class was Engineering Design Principles, a smaller seminar-style course. The professor, Dr. Chen, seemed kind enough as she explained the semester project. Students would work in teams to design a sustainable infrastructure solution for a developing region. It was exactly the kind of practical application Sarah had been looking forward to. Building instead of destroying, creating instead of killing. Then came the group assignments. Sarah found herself paired with 3 other students. Marcus, a loud guy who seemed more interested in making jokes than paying attention. Priya, a quiet girl who took meticulous notes. And Jason, who immediately suggested they meet at a coffee shop to discuss their project approach. Sarah agreed, though the thought of sitting in a crowded public space made her skin crawl. The coffee shop was worse than she'd anticipated. Too many people, too much noise, too many blind spots. Sarah positioned herself with her back to the wall and her eyes on the entrance. Marcus dominated the conversation with half-formed ideas, while Jason tried to organize their thoughts. Priya contributed thoughtful suggestions. Sarah mostly listened, analyzing their approaches, identifying the logical flaws in their reasoning. When she finally spoke, offering a solution that incorporated elements from everyone's ideas while addressing the structural concerns they'd overlooked, the group fell silent. Jason blinked at her in surprise. Even Marcus stopped talking. "That's actually brilliant," Priya said quietly. "How did you think of that so quickly?" Sarah shrugged. "I spent 3 years solving problems under pressure." "You learned to think efficiently." "Wait, were you in the military?" Marcus asked, his tone shifting from casual to curious. Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want their pity or their questions or their assumptions about what war was really like. I was deployed on Kepler 442b. The mood at the table changed instantly. Marcus and Jason exchanged glances. Priya's expression shifted to something that might have been respect, or might have been discomfort. Sarah couldn't tell which and didn't particularly care. "That must have been intense," Jason ventured carefully. "It was war," Sarah replied flatly. "Let's focus on the project." They worked for another hour, and Sarah had to admit they were competent enough. Not military-level efficient, but they had good ideas and genuine enthusiasm. When they finally parted ways, Sarah felt exhausted in a way that physical training never made her. Social interaction drained her in ways combat never had. As she walked back to her dorm in the fading evening light, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was fighting a different kind of battle now, one without clear rules of engagement or defined enemies, one where the battlefield was everyday life and the casualties were measured in lost connections and forgotten humanity. She passed by a group of students playing frisbee on the lawn, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. They looked so young, so unburdened. She'd been like that once, 3 years and a lifetime ago, before the recruitment officer had shown her the footage of Rex attacks on human colonies. Before she'd signed up to defend her species. Before she'd learned that victory had a price that couldn't be measured in medals or commendations. Sarah reached her dorm and found Emma decorating their room with fairy lights and posters. Her roommate chattered about her day, about the cute guy in her biology class, about plans for the weekend. Sarah made appropriate sounds and escaped to her bed, pulling out her tablet to review the course materials for tomorrow's classes. But the words blurred on the screen. Instead, she saw the faces of her fallen squadmates. She heard the sound of plasma fire. She felt the weight of command decisions that had saved lives and cost them in equal measure. The therapist had said it would get easier with time. That reintegration was a process, not an event, that she needed to be patient with herself. Sarah wasn't good at patience. She was good at missions and objectives and achieving goals, but surviving peace, that was a challenge she wasn't sure she knew how to face. Her tablet buzzed with a notification from the university's Veteran Services Office. Support group meeting tomorrow evening. She dismissed it without reading further. She didn't need support. She needed purpose. She needed to matter again in a world that had moved on without her. Outside her window, the campus hummed with life and possibility. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to remember why she'd fought so hard to protect this world. Tried to remember what peace was supposed to feel like. All she felt was lost. The classroom erupted in chaos when the fire alarm went off. Students scrambled for their belongings, shoving notebooks into bags and grabbing phones from desks. Some laughed nervously, assuming it was a drill. Others groaned about the interruption to their lecture. The professor raised his voice over the noise, trying to direct an orderly evacuation. Sarah was already moving. Her body had reacted before her conscious mind processed the sound. She'd assessed the room in seconds. 23 students, 2 exits, 1 window. The primary exit was bottlenecking as everyone pushed toward it. She headed for the secondary door on the side of the lecture hall, the one most people had forgotten existed. Outside, students gathered on the lawn in clusters, still chatting and checking their phones. Sarah stood apart from them, her eyes scanning the building, looking for smoke or signs of actual danger. Her training screamed at her to take action, to organize, to establish a perimeter. But this wasn't her unit. These weren't her soldiers, and this was probably just a drill. "Hey, military girl." Marcus jogged up to her, grinning. "You moved fast in there. Thought you were going to tactical roll out of the classroom." Sarah didn't smile. Fire alarms aren't a joke. People die in building fires because they don't take warning seriously. His grin faded slightly. Right, yeah, of course. He shifted awkwardly. Jason wants to meet this afternoon to work on the project. You free? I'll be there. The fire department arrived within minutes, which Sarah noted approvingly. They cleared the building quickly and gave the all clear. False alarm, probably triggered by someone vaping in a bathroom. Students filed back inside, already forgetting the interruption. But Sarah couldn't forget. Her heart rate was still elevated, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She'd been ready to fight or evacuate to save lives if needed. Instead, it had been nothing. Just another reminder that she was overreacting to normal civilian life. In her afternoon physics class, Sarah tried to concentrate on differential equations. The professor worked through a problem on the board, chalk scratching as numbers and symbols formed neat lines. It should have been straightforward. Sarah had tested well in mathematics before her deployment. Numbers followed rules. Equations had solutions. There was comfort in that certainty. But halfway through the problem, her mind wandered. She found herself calculating trajectories instead. Orbital drop patterns, artillery firing solutions, the mathematics of death delivered from above. She blinked hard and refocused on the board. The professor had moved on to the next problem. Sarah had lost the thread entirely. A girl next to her was taking perfect notes, her handwriting neat and organized. Sarah's own notebook had a few scattered equations and several dark spots where she'd pressed her pen too hard against the paper. After class, she went to the library. It was quieter there, easier to think. She found a corner desk and pulled out her engineering textbooks. If she couldn't focus in class, she'd teach herself. She'd done harder things than learn quantum mechanics. She'd survived the wrecks, she could survive calculus. Hours passed. The library slowly emptied as dinner time approached. Sarah worked through problem after problem, forcing her brain to stay on task. When she finally checked her tablet, she had 17 messages from Jason about the group meeting she'd missed. She cursed under her breath. She'd lost track of time completely. That used to never happen. In the military, timing was everything. You missed your window, people died. But here she'd just missed a study group. Sarah fired off a quick apology and promised to review whatever materials they'd covered. Jason's response was understanding, but she could read the frustration between the lines. They were counting on her to contribute, and she'd let them down. She gathered her things and headed for the dining hall, though she wasn't hungry. Eating had become mechanical, just fuel for her body. The dining hall was crowded with students enjoying dinner, the air thick with conversation and laughter. Sarah grabbed a tray and loaded it with protein and vegetables, avoiding the eyes of the people around her. She found an empty table in the corner and ate in silence. Across the hall, she spotted Emma sitting with a large group, animated and happy. Her roommate caught her eye and waved enthusiastically, gesturing for Sarah to join them. Sarah pretended not to see, focusing intently on her food. She wasn't being rude. She just couldn't handle the social performance right now. The smiling, the small talk, the pretending that she was a normal student with normal concerns. It was exhausting. A shadow fell across her table. Sarah looked up to find a guy standing there, tray in hand. He was tall with dark hair and eyes that held something she recognized. Something weary. Mind if I sit? He asked. Sarah almost said yes, she did mind. But something made her gesture to the empty chair across from her. The guy sat down with a nod of thanks and started eating without attempting conversation. They sat in silence for several minutes, and oddly, it didn't feel uncomfortable. You were on Kepler, weren't you? He finally said, not looking up from his food. Sarah's defenses went up instantly. What makes you say that? The way you sit. Back to the wall, eyes on the exits. The way you cleared your fork before setting it down, checking the tines. The way you're eating, efficient but mechanical. He finally met her eyes. I was there too. Third wave, Planetary Assault Division. Something in Sarah's chest loosened slightly. Second wave. Special Operations, he whistled low. Spec Ops. That explains a lot. I'm David Chen. Martinez. Sarah Martinez. They didn't shake hands. That felt too formal, too civilian. David just nodded and went back to his food. They ate in companionable silence, two veterans in a sea of people who couldn't understand. You going to the veteran support group? David asked as they cleared their trays. I don't do groups. Yeah, I didn't think I did either, but it helps sometimes. Talking to people who get it, he shrugged. Tomorrow night, Student Center Room 215. If you change your mind. Sarah watched him walk away, disappearing into the crowd of students. She'd been so focused on being alone that she hadn't considered there might be others like her here, other veterans trying to navigate this strange peace they'd fought to protect. Back in her dorm, Emma was getting ready for a party. She tried to convince Sarah to come along, insisting it would be fun and a great way to meet people. Sarah declined as politely as she could manage. Emma left in a cloud of perfume and excitement, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. She pulled up the university's Veteran Services page on her tablet and stared at the support group information. Tuesday evening, 7 o'clock. A safe space for student veterans to discuss their experiences and challenges. Led by a counselor who specialized in military transition, Sarah closed the page without registering. She wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe she'd never be ready. Instead, she pulled up her engineering homework and tried to focus. The problems were complex, requiring multiple steps and careful calculations. This she could do. This made sense. There were right answers and wrong answers. No moral gray areas or impossible choices. But even as she worked through the equations, part of her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about David's words, about the idea that there were others struggling with the same things she was. She'd been so isolated in her own head that she hadn't looked around to see who else might be fighting similar battles. At midnight, Sarah finally closed her books and prepared for bed. Emma still wasn't back, probably enjoying the party. Sarah was grateful for the solitude. She changed into sleep clothes and lay down, but knew she wouldn't sleep for hours yet. The insomnia had been constant since her return. She stared at the ceiling and thought about tomorrow. More classes, more social interaction, more pretending to be someone she wasn't anymore. The thought exhausted her. Her tablet buzzed with another message from Jason, this time with notes from the group meeting and action items for each team member. Sarah scanned through them, impressed despite herself with how organized he was. They divided up the research tasks efficiently. Her assignment was to analyze the structural engineering requirements for their proposed infrastructure project. At least that was something concrete she could work with. Something that had a purpose beyond just existing in this too peaceful world. Sarah closed her eyes and practiced the breathing exercises her therapist had taught her. In for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. It was supposed to calm the nervous system, ease the hypervigilance that kept her constantly on edge. It helped a little. Or maybe she was just getting better at pretending it helped. Outside her window, the campus was alive with weekend activities. Music drifted from a nearby dorm. Laughter echoed across the quad. People were living their lives, unaware of how fragile it all was. How quickly everything could change when an enemy decided your world was worth conquering. Sarah had kept these people safe. She and thousands of others had fought and bled and died to protect this peaceful existence. But now that she was here, part of it, she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. That she was an intruder in this world of normalcy. The war might be over, but Sarah was beginning to understand that her personal battle was just beginning. This was survival of a different kind, and she wasn't sure she had the right weapons for this fight. Tuesday evening found Sarah standing outside the student center, staring at the building entrance like it was enemy territory. She'd told herself she wasn't going to the veteran support group. She'd told herself she didn't need it. Yet here she was, 15 minutes before the meeting started, trying to convince herself to either go inside or walk away. A hand touched her shoulder and she spun, fists coming up defensively. David jumped back, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Whoa, sorry, didn't mean to startle you." Sarah forced herself to lower her hands, embarrassment flooding through her. "Don't sneak up on people." "Noted. You coming inside?" She glanced at the doors again. "I don't know. This feels like admitting something's wrong." "Something is wrong," David said simply. "We went to war." "That changes you." "Doesn't mean we're broken, just means we're carrying weight that most people here can't imagine." He started toward the entrance. "Come on. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just listen." Against her better judgment, Sarah followed him inside. Room 215 was a small conference room arranged with chairs in a circle. 8 other students were already there, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-30s. Some wore military unit patches on their jackets. Others looked like regular students except for the same watchfulness Sarah recognized in herself. The counselor was a woman in her 40s named Dr. Patricia Morrison. She welcomed them warmly, but without the excessive enthusiasm that Sarah had learned to hate from well-meaning civilians. Dr. Morrison had served too. Sarah realized, noting the subtle bearing in the way she scanned the room as people entered. The meeting started with introductions. Sarah learned that the group included Marines, Navy personnel, Army soldiers, and even a former pilot. They'd served in different capacities, different theaters, but they all shared the same struggle. Coming home, adjusting, finding purpose in a world that had moved on without them. When it was Sarah's turn, she kept it brief. Sarah Martinez, Army Special Operations, deployed to Kepler 442b for 3 years. Back 2 months ago, engineering major. No one pressed for details. They just nodded with understanding. That alone was worth the awkwardness of being here. A guy named James talked about his struggles with crowds and loud noises. A woman named Lieutenant Rodriguez, who insisted they just call her Anna, shared how she'd broken down crying in the middle of the grocery store because there were too many choices of cereal. It sounded absurd, but Sarah understood completely. After years of military rations and limited options, civilian abundance was overwhelming. David spoke about the guilt. Survivor's guilt, the counselor called it. The feeling that he didn't deserve to be here when so many of his friends hadn't made it home. His voice cracked when he mentioned his squad leader, who'd taken a plasma round meant for him. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. She wasn't alone in this. These people understood in ways her roommate, her classmates, even her therapist couldn't fully grasp. When Dr. Morrison asked if anyone else wanted to share, Sarah surprised herself by speaking. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I know how to complete missions. I know how to lead soldiers. I know how to survive hostile territory. But being a student? Being normal? I don't know how to do that anymore." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Anna spoke up. "None of us do. That's why we're here, to figure it out together." The meeting lasted an hour. When it ended, several people exchanged contact information. David invited Sarah to join a small group that met for coffee on Friday mornings before classes. Just a casual thing, he said. A chance to start the day with people who understood. Sarah agreed. It felt strange making plans like a normal person, but maybe that was the point. Walking back to her dorm, she felt lighter somehow. The weight was still there, but it didn't feel quite so crushing. Sharing her struggle had helped in a way she hadn't expected. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jason. The engineering project deadline had been moved up. They needed to meet this week to finalize their design proposal. Sarah sent back a confirmation and felt a small sense of accomplishment. She was handling things, slowly, but she was managing. The week progressed with its challenges. In her quantum mechanics class, the professor assigned a complex problem set that made her brain hurt. She spent hours in the library, working through the mathematics, occasionally getting up to walk laps around the floor when her concentration broke. Other students gave her strange looks, but she didn't care. Movement helped her think. Jason, Marcus, and Priya met with her on Wednesday to work on their project. They'd chosen to design a water purification and distribution system for a refugee settlement on Mars. The assignment required them to account for limited resources, harsh environmental conditions, and the needs of a displaced population. Sarah found herself fully engaged for the first time since classes started. This was problem-solving, she understood. Limited resources? She'd operated on supply lines that were constantly under threat. Harsh environment? She'd fought in conditions that would kill an unprotected human in minutes. Supporting a vulnerable population? That's what she'd been doing for 3 years. She pulled up specifications for portable purification units used by the military and began adapting them for civilian use. Marcus watched over her shoulder, impressed by her quick modifications. Priya asked questions about the stress calculations, which Sarah answered while simultaneously sketching out a distribution network that maximized efficiency. "You're really good at this," Jason said, reviewing her work. "This is way beyond freshman-level engineering." "I had field experience," Sarah replied. "You learn fast when lives depend on your solutions working." The group worked for 3 hours, and by the end, they had a solid preliminary design. Jason compiled their work into a presentation, promising to send it to everyone for review. As they packed up, Marcus invited Sarah to a party his fraternity was throwing on Friday night. "It'll be fun," he insisted. "Good music, free food, chance to blow off steam." Sarah declined. The thought of a crowded party with loud music and drinking made her anxiety spike. Marcus looked disappointed but didn't push. Priya walked out with Sarah, both of them heading toward the same dorm building. "I get it, you know," Priya said quietly as they crossed the quad, not wanting to do the party thing. "My cousin came back from the Europa campaign last year. He can't handle crowds either." "Too overwhelming." Sarah glanced at her, reassessing. "Your cousin, how's he doing now?" "Better, it took time. He's in a trade school now, learning to be an electrician. Says working with his hands helps." Priya adjusted her backpack. "He told me that the hardest part wasn't the combat or the danger. It was coming home and realizing he didn't fit anymore, that he'd changed too much to go back to who he was before." "Yeah," Sarah said softly. "That sounds about right." They parted ways at the dorm entrance. Inside, Sarah found Emma getting ready for the same party Marcus had mentioned. Her roommate was excited, chattering about someone named Tyler who would be there. Sarah listened with half her attention while changing into workout clothes. She needed to run, to burn off the nervous energy that always built up after extended social interaction. The campus track was almost empty at 7 in the evening. A few dedicated athletes ran laps, but mostly Sarah had the space to herself. She started running, pushing her pace until her lungs burned and her legs ached. This she understood. Physical pain was straightforward. You pushed through it, you became stronger. Not like emotional pain, which seemed to have no purpose and offered no clear path to improvement. After an hour, exhausted and drenched in sweat, Sarah finally headed back to her dorm. She showered and collapsed into bed, her body finally tired enough that sleep might actually come. Emma wouldn't be back for hours, so Sarah had the room to herself. She pulled out her tablet and found a message from David. Just a simple check-in, asking how her week was going. Sarah appreciated that he didn't demand detailed responses or push for personal information. She sent back a brief reply mentioning the support group and how unexpectedly helpful it had been. His response came quickly. "Told you. Friday morning coffee still on?" Sarah confirmed. She found herself actually looking forward to it, which surprised her. A month ago, the thought of voluntarily spending time with other people would have seemed impossible. Maybe that was progress. Small, incremental, barely noticeable, but progress nonetheless. Thursday brought a midterm exam in physics. Sarah had studied extensively, working through every practice problem she could find. The exam was challenging but fair, requiring both conceptual understanding and mathematical precision. She finished with 20 minutes to spare and used the time to check her calculations, finding and correcting 2 small errors. Walking out of the exam, she overheard other students complaining about how difficult it had been. Sarah didn't engage but felt a quiet satisfaction. She'd performed well. For once, her perfectionism and attention to detail had been an asset rather than a liability. That evening, she attended the veteran support group again. The faces were becoming familiar now. James updated them on his progress with exposure therapy for his noise sensitivity. Anna shared that she'd successfully completed her first week of volunteering at a local veterans organization. David talked about reconnecting with his family, how hard it was to explain what he'd experienced to people who only knew war from news reports. When Dr. Morrison asked Sarah how her week had gone, she found herself sharing about the engineering project, about how engaged she'd felt, how purposeful, about how working on something that would help people felt meaningful in a way that just attending classes didn't. "That's excellent insight," Dr. Morrison said. "You're identifying what gives you purpose. That's crucial for successful transition. The military provided clear mission parameters and defined objectives. Civilian life requires you to create your own mission. Sounds like you're starting to find yours." The words resonated with Sarah. Create your own mission. That framework made sense to her military-trained mind. She didn't have to just exist as a student. She could approach this like a campaign with strategic objectives and tactical goals. Her primary objective: complete her engineering degree. Tactical goals: excel in her classes, contribute meaningfully to group projects, develop her technical skills. Secondary objective: maintain her mental health and build a support network. Tactical goals: attend support groups, stay connected with David and the other veterans, practice self-care strategies. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. A way to apply her military mindset to civilian challenges. After the meeting, Sarah walked back through the campus with David and Anna. They talked about their classes, their struggles, their small victories. It felt good to be understood without having to explain everything. These people just got it. As Sarah lay in bed that night, Emma's soft snoring filling the quiet room, she realized something important. She was still fighting a war, just a different kind, not against an external enemy but against her own trauma, her own fears, her own sense of displacement, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to figure out how to win. The coffee shop near campus was crowded at 7 in the morning, filled with students desperate for caffeine before early classes. Sarah arrived to find David and Anna already at a corner table with 2 other veterans from the support group. They'd saved her a seat with her back to the wall, which she appreciated more than they probably realized. "Martinez, glad you made it," Anna said, sliding a black coffee toward her. "We got you the strongest thing they had. Figured you for a no-nonsense coffee drinker." She was right. Sarah took a grateful sip and settled into the chair. The conversation flowed easily around her. They talked about classes and professors, complained about difficult assignments, made jokes about the absurdity of civilian life. It felt remarkably normal, and Sarah realized that was exactly what she needed. A slice of normalcy with people who understood the abnormal things she'd experienced. James was talking about his history class, where the professor had lectured about the Vrex War. "It was surreal," he said, shaking his head. "She's talking about strategic decisions and casualty numbers like they're just data points. I'm sitting there remembering the smell of burning flesh and the sound of dying friends. She called it humanity's greatest military triumph. I call it the worst 3 years of my life." "Did you say anything?" David asked. "No, what would I say? That her neat historical narrative is missing the blood and trauma? That victory came at a cost she can't comprehend from her comfortable professor's office?" James laughed bitterly. "I just took notes and kept my mouth shut." Sarah understood that impulse. The gap between civilian understanding and veteran reality felt impossibly wide sometimes. How do you explain the weight of command decisions to someone who's never had to choose between bad options? How do you describe the bond formed with people who've saved your life and whose lives you've saved in return? Anna changed the subject to lighter topics, telling a funny story about her engineering lab mishap. The group laughed, and Sarah found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in days. These Friday morning coffee meetings were becoming her anchor, a touch point that helped her navigate the rest of the week. After coffee, Sarah headed to her quantum mechanics class. The material was getting progressively more complex, delving into probability wave functions and quantum entanglement. Most students looked lost, but Sarah was keeping up. The mathematics reminded her of targeting calculations, complex equations with multiple variables that had to be solved quickly and accurately. The professor, Dr. Williams, called on her to solve a problem on the board. Sarah walked to the front and worked through the calculation methodically, her handwriting less neat than Priya's but her logic sound. When she turned back to face the class, Dr. Williams was nodding approvingly. "Excellent work, Ms. Martinez. Your approach is unconventional, but efficient. Where did you learn to solve multivariate equations so quickly?" "Military training," Sarah replied simply, then returned to her seat. She could feel the other students looking at her with new interest, but she ignored them. She wasn't here to make friends or explain herself. She was here to learn. After class, a student approached her nervously. "Hey, I'm struggling with this material. Any chance you'd be willing to tutor me?" "I can pay." Sarah hesitated. Tutoring meant extended social interaction, explaining concepts, being patient with someone else's learning pace, all things that didn't come naturally to her anymore. But it would also reinforce her own understanding and provide extra income. $10 an hour, she said. "Library Saturdays at 2. Don't be late." The student, whose name was Kevin, agreed eagerly. Sarah made a note in her tablet and moved on to her next class. Her engineering design class was presenting their preliminary project proposals today. Jason had assembled their presentation professionally, incorporating everyone's contributions into a cohesive pitch. When their turn came, Sarah stood with her group at the front of the room while Jason controlled the slides. Marcus handled the introduction, explaining their choice to focus on Martian refugee settlements. Priya discussed the demographic research they'd conducted, outlining the population needs and resource constraints. Then it was Sarah's turn to present the technical specifications. She stepped forward and began explaining the water purification system they'd designed. As she spoke, her military training kicked in. She presented clearly and concisely, anticipating questions and addressing potential objections before they could be raised. She referenced load calculations and stress tolerances, explained redundancy systems and fail-safes. Dr. Chen interrupted with a challenging question about extreme temperature variance on Mars. Sarah didn't miss a beat, explaining how they'd incorporated thermal regulation systems based on military-grade environmental suits. She pulled up a supplementary slide Jason had included at her suggestion, showing the mathematical modeling they'd done. When their presentation ended, the class was silent for a moment. Then Dr. Chen started clapping, and the other students joined in. Sarah felt a flutter of something that might have been pride. That was exceptional work, Dr. Chen said. Your technical depth is far beyond what I expect from first-year students. Ms. Martinez, your practical experience really elevated this project. Well done, all of you. Back in their seats, Marcus high-fived Jason while Priya smiled with satisfaction. Sarah allowed herself a small sense of accomplishment. They'd done good work, real work that could actually help people. After class, Jason pulled the group aside. Listen, there's an engineering competition next semester. Design challenge for sustainable off-world habitats. Prize money and internship opportunities with major aerospace companies. We should enter as a team. Marcus was immediately on board. Priya looked interested. Sarah considered it. A focused project with clear objectives and measurable outcomes. It appealed to her need for purpose. I'm in, she said. Jason grinned. Awesome. We're going to crush this. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and studying. Sarah was getting better at managing her time, finding rhythms that worked for her. Early morning exercise, classes, library study sessions, evening support group or workout, then homework before bed. Structure helped. Routine provided stability when her internal world felt chaotic. That evening, instead of the support group, Sarah had her regular therapy appointment. Dr. Reeves practiced off campus, a deliberate choice Sarah had made to separate her mental health care from the university. The office was quiet and neutral, designed to be calming without being cloying. You seem different today, Dr. Reeves observed after they'd gone through the usual check-in. More centered. Sarah considered this. I guess I am. I've been thinking about what you said about finding purpose. I'm starting to see how I can use what I learned in the military in productive ways. Engineering, helping people, solving problems. That's excellent progress. What else has been helping? The veteran support group. Having people who understand without me having to explain everything. Sarah paused. And I'm tutoring someone. It's weird being responsible for teaching again, but in a different way than leading soldiers. They talked through Sarah's week, the challenges and small victories. Dr. Reeves helped her process a panic attack she'd had in the library when someone dropped a heavy textbook, the loud bang triggering her combat reflexes. They discussed strategies for managing triggers and grounding techniques for when her anxiety spiked. You're doing the work, Dr. Reeves said as their session wound down. Recovery isn't linear. You'll have setbacks, but you're building resilience and finding ways to adapt. That's what matters. Walking back to campus, Sarah reflected on the session. 3 months ago, she wouldn't have believed she could be functioning this well. She was attending classes, forming connections, finding purpose. It wasn't easy, and she still struggled daily with anxiety and hypervigilance, but she was managing. Back at the dorm, Emma was studying for an exam, surrounded by flashcards and notes. She looked up when Sarah entered, her expression relieved. Oh good, you're here. Can you help me understand thermodynamics? I know you took physics in high school and this is making no sense. Sarah almost said no automatically. But Emma had been patient with her silence, her odd hours, her occasional panic attacks. Her roommate had been kind without being pushy. That deserved reciprocation. Sure. What specifically are you struggling with? For the next hour, Sarah helped Emma work through thermodynamic principles, explaining concepts in simple terms and walking her through practice problems. Emma was a dedicated student, just not mathematically inclined. With patient explanation, she began to grasp the material. You're a really good teacher, Emma said gratefully. Thank you so much. I was seriously worried I'd fail this exam. You won't fail. You understand the concepts, you just needed them explained differently. Sarah packed up her own books. You should do fine tomorrow. Emma hesitated, then spoke carefully. I know we haven't really talked much, and I don't want to pry, but I want you to know that if you ever need anything or want to talk, I'm here. No pressure. Sarah was surprised by the offer and touched by Emma's genuine concern. Thanks. I appreciate that. That night, Sarah lay in bed feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the naive hope of her pre-war self, but something harder and more resilient. Hope tempered by experience. Hope that acknowledged the scars while refusing to be defined by them. Her tablet buzzed with a message from David. Just a meme about military versus civilian life. Something silly that made her smile. She sent back a laughing emoji, then realized it was the first emoji she'd used since returning home. Small victory, she thought. Small incremental progress. Outside her window, the campus was settling into Friday night revelry. Music drifted from various sources. Laughter echoed across the quad. Students were living their lives, enjoying their youth. Sarah had protected their right to that peace. Now she was learning to live in it alongside them. It wasn't the life she'd planned 3 years ago. That Sarah Martinez was gone, replaced by someone harder and more haunted. But maybe this Sarah could find her own path forward. Maybe she could build a life that honored what she'd sacrificed while creating something new. The journey was far from over. But for the first time, Sarah felt like she might actually reach a destination worth fighting for. Not through combat this time, but through persistence and adaptation and the slow work of healing. She closed her eyes and, for once, sleep came easily. The nightmare came without warning, as they always did. Sarah was back on Kepler 442b, plasma fire lighting up the sky in violent streaks of blue and white. Her squad was pinned down behind collapsed infrastructure. Burex forces advancing on 3 sides. She could hear Lieutenant Park screaming into the comms, calling for air support that wouldn't arrive in time. The smell of burning metal and flesh filled her nostrils. Her rifle was hot in her hands as she laid down covering fire. Then Park was beside her, half his face burned away, and he was asking her why she'd survived when he hadn't. Why she got to go home when his kids would grow up without their father. Blood ran from his ruined face as he stared at her with his one remaining eye. Sarah woke up gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Her hand reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Her eyes scanned for threats in the darkness. Slowly, reality reasserted itself. Dorm room. Safe. Earth. Not Kepler. Emma was sitting up in her bed, looking worried. "Sarah, are you okay?" "You were screaming." "Nightmare," Sarah managed, her voice hoarse. "Sorry for waking you." "Don't apologize. Do you want to talk about it?" "No." Sarah swung her legs out of bed, her heart still racing. "Go back to sleep." "I'm fine." She wasn't fine, but that wasn't Emma's problem to solve. Sarah grabbed her tablet and left the room, needing space and air. The common room was empty at 3 a.m. She sat on a couch and tried to slow her breathing, tried to remind herself that Park's death wasn't her fault. Except it was, in a way. She'd been the one to call in the airstrike that had saved the rest of the squad. Park had stayed behind to lay charges, buying them time to evacuate. The building had collapsed before he could get clear. He'd died doing his duty, following her orders. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled up her therapy app and started a grounding exercise. Name 5 things you can see. Couch, table, window, plant, poster. 4 things you can touch. Fabric, tablet screen, her own skin, the floor beneath her feet. 3 things you can hear. Distant music, heating system humming, her own breathing. 2 things you can smell. Coffee from earlier cleaning solution. 1 thing you can taste. Copper like blood, always like blood. Her phone buzzed. A message from David, can't sleep either. Sarah replied, nightmare, you too? His response was immediate, yeah, want company or prefer to be alone? 10 minutes later, David appeared in the common room carrying 2 energy drinks and a deck of cards. He didn't ask about her nightmare or offer platitudes. He just sat down across from her and started shuffling the cards. Gin rummy? He suggested. They played cards in silence for a while, the simple game providing a distraction from thoughts neither wanted to voice. Eventually, David spoke. It was my weapons specialist, Rodriguez. I dream about her at least twice a week. She was 23, engaged, planning a wedding for when we got home. He laid down a spread of cards. Frex ambush. She took a hit meant for our medic. Died instantly. Lieutenant Park, Sarah said, matching his honesty with her own. My squad leader. He didn't make it out of a building before it collapsed. I gave the order that put him in that position. That's the thing that gets me, David said. In war, doing your job means people die. Sometimes you're people, and you have to live with that. Do we, though? Live with it? Sarah asked. Or do we just survive it? David considered this. Maybe at first we just survive, but eventually we have to find a way to actually live. Otherwise, what did they die for? The words hit Sarah hard. What had they died for? For humanity's survival, yes. For the protection of Earth and its colonies, but also so that the survivors could have futures, could build lives worth living. If she spent the rest of her life just surviving, haunted and hollow, then their sacrifices meant less. They played cards until the sun started to rise, until other students began emerging for early morning classes and workouts. David packed up the cards and stood. Thanks for the company, he said. Yeah, thanks for showing up. Sarah returned to her room to find Emma getting ready for class. Her roommate looked tired but didn't mention the middle of the night disturbance. Sarah appreciated the discretion. She showered quickly, washing away the remnants of nightmare sweat, and prepared for the day. Saturday brought her first tutoring session with Kevin. He showed up at the library precisely at 2 o'clock, which Sarah appreciated. They found a quiet study room and Kevin pulled out his quantum mechanics textbook, marked with dozens of sticky notes. I don't understand wave functions, he admitted. The math makes sense when the professor explains it, but then I try problems on my own and it falls apart. Sarah walked him through the fundamentals, breaking down complex concepts into manageable pieces. She found herself enjoying the teaching process. There was satisfaction in watching understanding dawn in someone else's eyes, in finding the right explanation that made difficult material click. They worked for 2 hours, Kevin gradually growing more confident with the material. When they finished, he seemed genuinely grateful. That was incredibly helpful. Same time next week? Sarah agreed. As Kevin left, she realized that teaching gave her something the military had provided. The sense that she was helping someone, making a tangible difference. It wasn't the same as saving lives in combat, but it was valuable in its own way. Sunday was designated for the engineering competition project. Jason had booked a conference room and the team gathered with laptops, textbooks, and ambitious plans. The competition required them to design a self-sustaining habitat for 50 people on Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon. Okay. So the main challenges are radiation shielding, temperature control, food production, and water access, Jason said, writing on the whiteboard. We need to address all of these in our design. Marcus suggested using the subsurface ice deposits for water and thermal regulation. Priya researched Europa's radiation environment and calculated the necessary shielding thickness. Sarah started sketching structural designs, incorporating elements from military base construction she'd seen on hostile worlds. What if we build underground? She proposed. Use Europa's ice layer itself as radiation shielding. We tunnel down, create a network of interconnected chambers. It's how we built the research stations on Titan during the war. The group looked at her sketch, then at each other. Jason started nodding enthusiastically. That's genius. The ice provides natural insulation and protection. We just need to engineer stable chamber walls and prevent ice shifting. They spent the next 4 hours refining the concept. Sarah contributed insights from military engineering, explaining how to create structurally sound tunnels in unstable materials. Marcus researched hydroponic farming systems that could function in low light. Priya calculated power requirements and designed a hybrid nuclear geothermal energy system. By evening, they had a solid preliminary design. Jason started organizing their research and calculations into a formal proposal document. The competition deadline was 2 months away, giving them time to refine and test their concepts. We're actually going to win this thing, Marcus said confidently. Priya smiled. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But we do have a strong design. Sarah felt genuine excitement about the project. This was engineering with purpose, solving real problems that would matter for humanity's expansion into space. It reminded her why she'd wanted to study engineering in the first place, before the war had interrupted her plans. Walking back to her dorm that evening, Sarah reflected on how different she felt compared to a month ago. The nightmares still came. The hypervigilance remained. But she was building something here, creating a life that had meaning beyond just existing. Her tablet buzzed with a message from the Veteran Services Office. They were organizing a remembrance ceremony for fallen soldiers on Veterans Day, 2 weeks away. Veterans and active duty service members were invited to participate. Sarah stared at the invitation for a long time before responding that she would attend. Honoring the dead felt important. Park, Rodriguez, and thousands of others deserved to be remembered, not as statistics or historical footnotes, but as real people who'd made real sacrifices. People who'd had hopes and dreams and families. Monday brought a challenging physics exam that Sarah felt confident about, and an equally challenging engineering design test that required creative problem-solving under time pressure. She thrived under pressure. Combat had taught her to think clearly when stakes were high. Between classes, she met with Dr. Chen to discuss her academic trajectory. The professor had noticed her advanced understanding and suggested she consider accelerating her program. You have practical experience that most engineering students won't get until internships or first jobs, Dr. Chen explained. With focused effort, you could complete your degree in 3 years instead of 4. Maybe even apply for graduate programs. Sarah hadn't considered graduate school. She'd been focused on just surviving undergraduate work, but the idea appealed to her. More specialized knowledge, deeper expertise, greater capability to contribute meaningfully to humanity's future. "I'll think about it," she said. "Please do. You have real talent, Ms. Martinez. Don't let it go to waste." That evening's support group meeting was smaller than usual. Some members were dealing with midterm stress, others had scheduling conflicts. But the core group was there. David, Anna, James, and a few others. They talked about their weeks, shared struggles and victories. Sarah mentioned the remembrance ceremony. Anna immediately said she'd attend too. David nodded agreement. James looked uncomfortable but said he'd think about it. These ceremonies were hard, bringing up memories many of them spent months trying to suppress. Dr. Morrison facilitated a discussion about healthy versus unhealthy remembrance. How to honor the fallen without being consumed by survivors' guilt. How to carry memory forward as motivation rather than burden. It was heavy material but important. After the meeting, Anna invited Sarah to join her for a volunteer shift at the local Veterans Center. "It's just helping with paperwork and directing people to resources, but it feels good to give back." Sarah agreed to come along. Helping other veterans navigate their transition seemed like a worthwhile way to spend time. She understood their struggles better than most. Back in her dorm, Emma was video chatting with her boyfriend. Sarah put on headphones and worked on homework, giving her roommate privacy. They'd found a rhythm that worked for both of them, respecting each other's needs without requiring deep friendship. As Sarah worked through a complex thermodynamics problem, she realized something important. She was adapting. The process was slow and painful, filled with setbacks and nightmares and moments of despair. But she was learning to live in this peacetime world she'd fought to protect. The war had changed her fundamentally. That couldn't be undone. But maybe change didn't have to mean destruction. Maybe she could take the strength and resilience the military had forged in her and apply it to building a meaningful civilian life. Lieutenant Park would have wanted that. Rodriguez would have wanted that. All the fallen would have wanted the survivors to thrive, not just survive. Sarah closed her textbook and looked out the window at the campus lights glowing in the darkness. Somewhere out there, students were laughing and studying and living their lives. Lives made possible by people like her, who'd fought so others didn't have to. She'd been a warrior. Now she was learning to be a builder. Both required courage, just different kinds. Both served humanity's future, and maybe that was enough. Maybe that was how she could honor the dead while caring for the living, including herself. Veterans Day arrived with cold November rain. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, fingers fumbling with the buttons of her dress uniform. She debated whether to wear it, whether displaying her service so openly would invite questions she wasn't ready to answer. But the fallen deserved to be honored properly, and that meant wearing the uniform she'd earned through blood and sacrifice. The medals on her chest felt heavy. Bronze Star for Valor, Purple Heart for wounds received, campaign ribbons marking 3 years of combat operations. Each piece of metal represented memories she'd rather forget, but felt obligated to carry. Emma knocked softly on the bathroom door. "You look really distinguished," she said carefully. "Those medals, they're for real combat?" "Yeah, I can't imagine what that was like." Sarah met her eyes in the mirror. "I hope you never have to." The remembrance ceremony was held in the university's main amphitheater. Sarah arrived early to find dozens of veterans already gathered, many in uniform, others in civilian clothes with service pins. She spotted David immediately, his dress blues immaculate. Anna stood nearby in her Marine uniform, talking quietly with James. The amphitheater filled slowly. Veterans, faculty, students, and community members took their seats. A military color guard presented the flags, their movements precise and synchronized. Sarah stood at attention automatically, muscle memory taking over. The university president spoke first, offering generic thanks for service and sacrifice. His words were well-meaning but hollow, the speech of someone who understood war only as an abstract concept. Sarah tuned him out, focusing instead on the names being read. A veteran from each service branch came forward to read names of the fallen from their branch. When it was the Army's turn, a captain in dress uniform began the long recitation. Each name was followed by rank and unit. Sarah knew some of them, had served alongside them, had watched some of them die. Lieutenant James Park, 2nd Special Operations Battalion. Sarah's chest tightened. David's hand found hers, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. The names continued, a seemingly endless roll call of the dead. Each name represented a person, a story, a family left behind. The weight of it was crushing. After the names came the speeches from veteran students. Anna spoke about her squad leader, a woman who'd saved her life and taught her what true leadership meant. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through, determined to honor the memory. David spoke about Rodriguez, his weapons specialist. He talked about her sense of humor, her dedication, her dreams of becoming a teacher after her service ended. Dreams that would never be fulfilled. Several people in the audience were crying. Then Dr. Morrison was gesturing to Sarah, asking if she wanted to speak. Sarah hadn't planned to, but she found herself standing, walking to the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces. Lieutenant Park was the best officer I ever served under, she began, her voice steady despite the chaos inside. He taught me that leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about making impossible choices and living with the consequences. He taught me that protecting your people sometimes means sacrificing yourself. She paused, gathering her thoughts. He died buying time for the rest of us to evacuate. He knew the building would collapse. He went in anyway because that's what needed to be done. That's what all of them did. The people we're remembering today, they made choices that cost them everything so the rest of us could have futures. Sarah looked at the veterans in the audience, saw her own pain reflected in their faces. The hardest part isn't the combat or the danger. It's coming home and trying to figure out what to do with the future they gave us. How do we make their sacrifices mean something? How do we live lives worthy of their deaths? She gripped the podium. I don't have answers. I'm still figuring it out day by day. But I think it starts with refusing to waste what they bought for us. With building something meaningful. With remembering that peace isn't the absence of war. It's what we make when we have the chance. When she returned to her seat, several veterans nodded at her. David squeezed her shoulder. Anna was crying openly. The ceremony continued with a moment of silence, then taps played by a lone bugler. The mournful notes echoed through the amphitheater, and Sarah let herself cry for the first time since coming home. After the ceremony, many people approached to thank the veterans for their service. Sarah accepted their gratitude with practiced politeness, though the words felt inadequate. Thank you for your service never quite captured what service actually cost. An older woman stopped in front of her, tears streaming down her face. My son served on Kepler. He didn't make it home. Thank you for being willing to fight. Thank you for surviving. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. How do you respond to a mother's grief? She settled for, your son's sacrifice mattered. They all mattered. The woman hugged her and Sarah stood stiffly, uncomfortable with the physical contact but understanding the need. When she finally pulled away, the woman pressed something into Sarah's hand. A military challenge coin worn smooth from handling. He would have wanted you to have this. You survivors. You're carrying their memory forward. That means everything. Sarah closed her fingers around the coin, feeling its weight. Another burden to carry. Another reminder of what had been lost. But also a connection, a tangible link to the fallen. She added it to the small collection she kept in her pocket, alongside Park's dog tags that she'd been unable to part with. The veteran group gathered after the ceremony at a nearby diner, needing time to decompress with people who understood. They ordered comfort food and talked quietly, processing their emotions. The ceremony had been hard but necessary, ripping open wounds that never fully healed. I hate these things, James admitted, but I hate not going more. Like I owe it to them to remember even when it hurts. It should hurt. Anna said softly. They died, we live. That deserves to hurt. David nodded agreement. The day it stops hurting is the day we've forgotten what it cost. I never want to forget, Sarah understood. The pain was part of the price of survival. You carried it, you bore it, you learned to function despite it. But you didn't let it go because letting it go felt like betraying the memory of the fallen. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lost friends and comrades. It was cathartic in a way that individual grief couldn't be. Shared loss created connection, reminded them they weren't alone in their struggle. When Sarah finally returned to her dorm late that night, Emma was asleep. Sarah changed out of her uniform carefully, hanging it with precision born of military habit. She pulled out her tablet and started writing. She wrote about Park, about his leadership and his sacrifice. She wrote about the other members of her squad who hadn't made it home. She wrote about the weight of survival and the challenge of living up to their memories. She wrote until her eyes burned and her fingers ached. Dr. Reeves had suggested journaling as a way to process trauma. Sarah had resisted at first, seeing it as a waste of time. But tonight the words poured out and she found a strange relief in externalizing the pain. Putting it on the page made it slightly less overwhelming in her head. The next morning, Sarah woke to find a message from Dr. Chen. The engineering competition submission deadline had been moved up by a week. Their team needed to meet urgently to finalize their design proposal. Sarah pushed aside her exhaustion and messaged the group, suggesting they meet that afternoon. The project became a welcome distraction from the emotional rawness left by the ceremony. They spent the entire day refining their Europa habitat design, working through calculations and strengthening their proposal. Sarah threw herself into the work, grateful for problems with concrete solutions. Jason had compiled their research into a comprehensive technical document. Marcus had created detailed 3D models of their habitat design. Priya had performed stress analysis and environmental simulations. Sarah reviewed everything with a critical eye, catching small errors and suggesting improvements. "This is really good work," she said finally. "We have a legitimate shot at winning this." "We're definitely submitting the strongest design I've seen from any first-year team," Jason agreed. "And I've been spying on the competition." They spent another hour polishing their submission, then uploaded it with 20 minutes to spare before the deadline. As the confirmation email arrived, the team exchanged satisfied looks. Whatever happened, they'd produced quality work they could be proud of. That week, Sarah's tutoring sessions with Kevin expanded. 2 of his friends wanted help with physics, and soon Sarah was running a small study group on Saturday afternoons. She found she enjoyed teaching, the way it required her to break down complex concepts and communicate clearly. It used skills she'd developed as a squad leader in different but valuable ways. Her own coursework was progressing well. She'd maintained high marks in all her classes, her work ethic and discipline serving her effectively in academics. Dr. Williams, her quantum mechanics professor, asked if she'd consider being a teaching assistant the following semester. The position would provide income and good experience. Sarah accepted. Building a life meant saying yes to opportunities, even when they pushed her outside her comfort zone. Every yes was a small victory against the part of her that wanted to isolate and withdraw. The nightmares continued, though their frequency was decreasing. She'd learned techniques to manage them better, ways to ground herself when she woke in panic. The support group helped. Therapy helped. Having structure and purpose helped most of all. Friday morning coffee with the veteran group had become a sacred ritual. They talked about their weeks, shared struggles, celebrated small victories. David announced he'd reconnected with his father after years of strained relationship. Anna shared that she'd been accepted into a competitive research program. James admitted he'd finally scheduled the surgery to repair damage from his combat injuries. Sarah told them about her teaching assistant position and the engineering competition. They were genuinely happy for her, understanding how significant these achievements were for her recovery. These people had become more than friends. They were her new unit, her squad, the people who had her back in this different kind of war. November progressed with its gray skies and cold rain. Sarah established routines that sustained her: morning exercise, classes, study sessions, support group, tutoring. Each day had structure, each week had rhythm. She was learning to exist in peacetime without feeling completely adrift. Emma was planning to go home for Thanksgiving break. She invited Sarah to join her, offering to have her family include one more at their table. Sarah declined, explaining she'd be staying on campus. The truth was that she couldn't handle family dynamics right now. The well-meaning questions and awkward attempts at gratitude for her service. Instead, she planned to spend the holiday with other veterans who were staying on campus. They'd organize their own Thanksgiving, a small gathering of people who understood each other's struggles. Anna was cooking. David was providing entertainment. James was bringing dessert. It wouldn't be a traditional family celebration, but it would be real and honest. As Sarah sat in her dorm room late one evening, reviewing the week's assignments, she realized something important. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to actually live. The transition from warrior to student, from combat veteran to civilian, was far from complete. But she was making progress, building a life that had meaning and purpose. The war had taken so much from her. Her innocence, her sense of safety, her easy confidence in the world. It had cost her friends and pieces of her soul. But it had also forged her into someone stronger, someone capable of enduring and adapting and finding ways forward, even when the path seemed impossible. Lieutenant Park would be proud of her progress. She was honoring his sacrifice by refusing to waste the future he'd died to give her. That mattered. That meant something. Sarah closed her textbook and looked out at the rainy campus night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow. She was ready for them. Not perfectly healed, not without scars, but ready to keep fighting this different kind of battle. The battle to build a life worth living in the peace she'd helped secure. Spring semester arrived with unexpected warmth, melting the last of winter's snow and bringing new life to the campus. Sarah had survived her first semester back, finishing with a perfect grade point average and a growing sense that she might actually belong here, not in the way she'd belonged before the war, but in a new way that accepted who she'd become. The engineering competition results came back in January. Their team had placed second overall, beaten by a graduate student team but ranking above every other undergraduate entry. The prize included a small cash award and, more importantly, internship interviews with 3 major aerospace companies. Jason was ecstatic. Marcus treated them all to dinner. Priya quietly beamed with satisfaction. Sarah felt genuine pride. They'd built something meaningful, created a design that could actually help humanity expand into space. This was the kind of contribution she'd been searching for, the kind of purpose that made the struggle of civilian life feel worthwhile. Dr. Chen called Sarah into her office the day after results were announced. "Congratulations on your placement, but I want to talk about something more important." She pulled up a file on her computer. "I've been reviewing your work this semester. Your technical skills are exceptional, far beyond typical first-year level. I want to recommend you for the accelerated graduate program." Sarah leaned forward. "What does that entail?" "You'd complete your undergraduate degree in 2.5 years instead of 4, then transition directly into our master's program with full funding. You'd be working on cutting-edge aerospace engineering projects, developing systems for space exploration and colonization." Dr. Chen smiled. "Basically, you'd be designing the future." Interested? It was everything Sarah hadn't known she wanted. A clear path forward, concrete goals, the opportunity to contribute meaningfully to humanity's expansion among the stars. The kind of mission that would honor the sacrifices of the fallen while building something new. "I'm very interested." "Good. I'll start the paperwork. This is competitive, but your combination of practical experience and academic excellence makes you an ideal candidate." Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. "You've been through hell, Sarah, but you're using that experience to build something valuable. That's not nothing." Sarah left the meeting feeling energized in a way she hadn't felt since before her deployment. She had a mission again, objectives to accomplish, a reason to push forward. The path ahead was still difficult, but now it had direction. That evening's support group meeting buzzed with similar energy. Several members shared positive updates. David had accepted a summer internship at a robotics company. Anna was publishing her first research paper. James had completed his surgery successfully and was recovering well. Even the quieter members seemed more hopeful, more stable. Dr. Morrison facilitated a discussion about growth and progress. "You've all come so far since the beginning of the semester. When we started meeting, many of you couldn't imagine functioning in civilian life. Now look at you, thriving in your programs, building careers, forming connections. That's significant achievement." "It doesn't always feel like achievement," James admitted. "Some days still feel like just survival." "That's normal," Dr. Morrison assured him. "Recovery isn't linear. You'll have good days and bad days. The difference is that now you have tools to handle the bad days, and you're building lives that give you reasons to push through. After the meeting, the core group lingered. They'd formed a genuine bond, these veterans navigating the strange territory of peacetime together. David suggested they celebrate their collective progress with dinner at a nice restaurant, something none of them had felt ready for earlier in the year. They chose a quiet place with dim lighting and good food. Sarah still sat with her back to the wall and her eyes on the exits, but she could relax enough to enjoy the meal and the company. They talked about their plans for the future, their hopes and concerns. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated with laughter and the occasional serious moment. "I'm thinking about applying to law school," Anna announced. "Using my GI Bill to become a veterans' rights attorney. Too many people are getting screwed by the system. Someone needs to fight for them." "That's perfect for you," David said. "You've got the fire for it." "What about you, Martinez?" James asked. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Sarah considered the question. 5 years ago, she couldn't have imagined surviving the war. Now she was planning a future that extended beyond mere survival. Graduate school for aerospace engineering, then working on space habitat design, maybe for one of the colonial development companies, helping build the settlements that will let humanity expand beyond Earth. She paused. "Feels like a natural extension of what we fought for. We defended humanity's right to exist. Now I want to help secure our future among the stars." David raised his glass. "To futures worth fighting for." They clinked glasses, these warriors learning to be builders. The toast felt significant, a marker of how far they'd all come. 6 months ago, none of them could have imagined this moment. Now it felt possible, even natural. Sarah's tutoring practice had grown to 8 regular students. She'd moved from the library to booking a small classroom, running structured study sessions that helped struggling students grasp difficult material. Word had spread that the veteran engineering student was an exceptional teacher who could explain complex concepts clearly. Students appreciated her no-nonsense approach and genuine desire to help them succeed. Kevin, her first tutoring student, had improved dramatically. He'd gone from nearly failing quantum mechanics to earning a solid B on the final exam. He credited Sarah with saving his academic career and insisted on paying her double for the last session. She'd refused the extra money but felt genuine satisfaction at his success. Emma had become more than just a roommate. They weren't best friends, but they'd developed a comfortable relationship based on mutual respect. Emma had learned to recognize when Sarah needed space and when she needed company. Sarah had learned to participate in occasional social activities, attending study groups and even one party where she'd stayed for a full hour before her anxiety forced her to leave. Her therapy sessions with Dr. Reeves had evolved. They spent less time processing trauma and more time discussing Sarah's future plans. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were less frequent and less intense. The hypervigilance remained, probably always would, but Sarah had learned to manage it better. She'd never be the carefree person she'd been before the war, but she was becoming someone new, someone stronger, more purposeful, more resilient. In March, Sarah received notice that she'd been accepted into the accelerated graduate program. The letter praised her academic excellence, her practical experience, and her demonstrated commitment to advancing aerospace engineering. She'd start advanced coursework in the fall while completing her undergraduate requirements. A challenging schedule, but one she felt ready to tackle. She called her parents that evening, the first extended conversation they'd had since she'd returned from deployment. Her mother cried with pride. Her father, a career military man himself, told her he was proud of how she'd handled the transition. They'd worried about her in those first difficult months, but she was clearly finding her way. "You're doing exactly what you should be," her father said. "Taking what the military taught you and using it to build something meaningful. That's how you honor the fallen, Sarah, by living well." His words echoed what she'd been discovering for herself. The best way to honor those who died was to make their sacrifice meaningful by building a future worth their deaths. Every calculation she completed, every student she helped, every design she contributed to was a small act of remembrance and respect. April brought the anniversary of the battle where Lieutenant Park had died. Sarah woke that morning with the familiar weight of grief pressing down on her chest. She'd known this day would be difficult. Instead of hiding from it, she decided to face it directly. She went to the campus memorial garden, a quiet space where veterans could reflect. Someone had installed a small plaque listing the names of all university students who'd died in the Vrex War. Park's name was there, along with dozens of others. Sarah sat on a bench and pulled out the challenge coin the grieving mother had given her at the Veterans Day ceremony. "We're doing okay, Lieutenant," she said quietly to the plaque. "Still fighting, just different battles now. Learning to live instead of just survive. I think you'd approve." She sat there for an hour, remembering. Not just the death, but the life. Park's terrible jokes. His dedication to his troops. The way he'd always found time to listen when someone needed to talk. He'd been a good officer and a good man. The world was less for his absence. But Sarah was here, living the future he'd died to protect. That had to count for something. David found her there later. He didn't say anything, just sat beside her in companionable silence. Eventually, Anna and James joined them. They all had their anniversaries, their difficult days marked by memories of loss. Today they were here for Sarah, offering support through their presence. "I'm thinking about starting a scholarship fund," Sarah said suddenly. "For children of soldiers killed in the war. Help them afford college, give them opportunities their parents can't provide anymore." "That's a great idea," Anna said. "Count me in to help organize it." "We could do fundraising events," David suggested. "Maybe coordinate with the Veteran Services Office." They spent the afternoon planning, turning grief into action. It felt right, channeling the pain of loss into something constructive. Park's children would get military death benefits, but thousands of other families were struggling. A scholarship fund wouldn't bring anyone back, but it would help the next generation. The children who'd paid a price for a war they hadn't chosen. By May, Sarah had established a routine that sustained her effectively. Early morning workouts kept her physically strong and mentally clear. Classes challenged her intellectually. Her teaching assistant duties and tutoring sessions gave her purpose. Support group and therapy provided emotional processing. Friday coffee with her veteran friends offered connection and understanding. She still had bad days. Days when the nightmares were particularly vivid. Days when crowds felt unbearable and loud noises triggered panic responses. Days when she couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't deserve to be alive when so many others weren't. But the bad days were becoming less frequent, and she'd learned to ride them out without spiraling. The scholarship fund had gained traction. With help from the Veteran Services Office, they'd raised $15,000 through bake sales, fundraising dinners, and direct donations from sympathetic faculty and alumni. It wasn't enough to change the world, but it would pay for one student's first year of college. A start. Jason's team decided to stay together for another competition. They'd learned to work well together, understanding each other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Marcus had gotten more serious about his contributions. Priya had grown more confident in presenting ideas. Jason remained the organizational backbone, and Sarah brought technical expertise and practical insight that elevated their work. Their new project focused on designing a sustainable transportation system for Mars colonies. Sarah drew on her combat experience with hostile environment vehicles, adapting military technology for civilian use. The work was challenging and engaging, exactly what she needed. Final exams arrived with the usual stress and pressure.